Hey everybody, welcome to the latest issue of the Trust Me, I'm a Lawyer podcast. My name's Spencer Ehrenfeld, and with me, as always, is my co-host and our executive producer, Nori Ehrenfeld, live from the campus at Florida Gulf Coast University. How you doing, Nori?
I'm good. Hi, everybody.
It's great to see you again.
Vice versa.
Your dorm room looks great. I love what you've done to the place.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nori, we have a special guest today, and I'm going to say, other than you, he is one of my favorite people in the entire world. He is one of the best people I've ever met in my 55 years on this planet. I adore him. I love him. Introduce our guest, please, to everybody.
Today we have Matthias Hayashi, who, like my dad said, has been a longtime friend of both him and me. And having grown up, understanding that a lot of the employees of my dad's firm come and go and don't last long, it's refreshing to see one that's been here for, I can't remember since the day he started working there, and it feels
decades.
Yeah. And it's just been a long journey.
Well, Nori, he's
has it been only 2016?
It seems.
Yeah, I know. It feels like it's longer, but it's going to be almost 5 years coming up soon. It's hard to believe that much time, but.
Well, he's tried to resign a few times, Nori. I think you were even there. I just won't accept his resignation. I will not let him leave. I want him to work with me for the rest of our natural lives.
I want that as well.
Yes, I adore him. So,
Certainly,
Matthias, welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Yeah, well, good to be here.
It's been a long time since we chatted, but I'm kidding because Matt and I spend almost all day doing exactly what we're doing right now, talking to each other on video cameras.
Yeah, definitely familiar territory.
So, Matt, I wanted you to share with some people your background, because I think you come from an exceptionally unique educational and cultural background, and I'm hoping that you will serve as an inspiration to lawyers or people out there who are thinking of becoming lawyers that have a similar background as yours, because I adore you, I respect you, and I love you, and I think that you've overcome quite a bit to become one of the preeminent maritime trial lawyers in the country. Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Oh, sure thing. Well, yeah, maybe there's a lot about me that maybe people can relate to. I'm a son of a immigrant. My dad is from Japan. My mom's American from here, but my dad, is a first generation Japanese American. Came here in the 1970s. Came here with little more than shirt on his back, like a lot of immigrants. But he he worked hard, started his own business. Eventually, met my mom and had me. And by no means did I grow up like impoverished, but I definitely did not grow up with a silver spoon, if that's the expression. I had to help my dad out a lot when I was growing up. Small business. My dad only had sometimes like limited employees, and I would be right there helping him like pack tuna fish and ship them out, to the airport to go all over the country. Got them in from countries like Ecuador, process them. I kind of grew up with family business, and kind of, you could say I sort of started off, blue collar in that way. But I was always really interested in academic subjects. Actually, my sort of beginning in my academic adventure was actually history, because I started discovering history documentaries at about 12 years old. And I remember the first history documentary I ever watched. It was the History of Rome. It was, I think, like a big Discovery Channel documentary going through the whole history of Rome. And I remember my mom bought that for me as like a Christmas present, I think. And I watched like the whole thing.
How old were you, Matt, when you were watching this?
I was 12 years old. I watched like the whole thing over like a few days.
So isn't that interesting, Nori? Some kids for 12 years old get skateboards and BB guns, and Matt's mother bought him History Channel documentary on the history of Rome, and that's what he loves.
Says a
right.
lot.
I mean, Right. So, when I started discovering that I love the study of history, I mean, that was naturally what I decided to major in when I, came time for me to go to college.
Well,
Um,
before we get to college, Matt, do you mind sharing with our viewers a little bit about the unique education you had leading up to college?
oh yeah, actually, how can I forget? So
I know.
it was also not an unusual. I mean, it was also maybe something that is a little bit unusual, is that I actually was homeschooled all the way from essentially kindergarten all the way to graduation. I did end up graduating a little early, so I could start going to community college at about 16. So, I finished a little bit early there, but I was homeschooled. I just really wasn't fitting in that well in the public school system. They want to kind of fit everybody sometimes into like a square peg. Even if you're or yes, or if like they kind of want to fit everybody in maybe into a circle, even if you're a square peg. And that's kind of how it felt like with me. They had this sort of approach to dealing with kids that just wasn't really working for me. And thank goodness my mom believed in me, and she decided that it was really more the school's fault that it wasn't quite getting me than it was like my fault for not fitting in. And I think that's a very important lesson that maybe sometimes parents something that maybe parents can learn from in a way, because you know sometimes it's not necessarily the student that is the issue. Sometimes it's like trying to have too much of a one size fits all approach. And not everybody can necessarily homeschool, but sometimes there may be other options out there, especially nowadays. I think with, I don't know, vouchers and other school choice available, that just I think really wasn't back then. It's definitely something that I think is there might be a lesson there.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you, Matt, is because I'm thinking there might be kids that are being homeschooled right now that are watching this, or parents that are homeschooling their children and thinking, you know what, this might limit my kids' professional ability, professional choices. And here you are, who's someone who was homeschooled, and not only did you graduate from your homeschool program, but then you excelled at the University of Miami in a very academically competitive environment. What was that transition like, going from a class of one, where you were your own prom date and your own football team, to coming to the University of Miami, which is an international school, international campus with kids from all over the place, and not only surviving there, but thriving in that environment? What was that like?
So actually, for me, college was a pretty natural fit. Actually, it was actually I actually loved college, and I don't know that this will necessarily be everybody's experience, but for me, it felt like a very natural transition to go from homeschooling to the college experience. And there's probably a couple reasons for that. First of all, I think there's a misconception that homeschoolers are all just locked away in their home all day and they don't really interact with other people. That's definitely not that's definitely not true from my experience, and that's not true for a lot of other homeschoolers that I know. In fact, there's like a whole community of homeschoolers if you take the time to look for them. um, and usually that's one. Usually we got together, did like activities, also even like shared like class experience. I should say the teachers kind of got together and the teachers were all the moms basically. They all got together and they all realized, hey, I was, for example, some moms were history majors, some moms were science majors, some were like yeah, you name it. Not maybe too many engineers, but like you get the idea. Everybody had a different specialty.
Can
And
you imagine, Nori? Can you imagine from kindergarten through high school graduation, you're at home and being taught by your mother?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I know a few kids who are friends with me that are also homeschooled, and I actually went to a middle school for like 2 years or 3 years, uh, and like into high school. That was kind of like a homeschool system, which there were only about 60 kids in the whole school, and it went from like K through 12. And so my class size was around 5 kids, and it was an extremely individualized system, which I think speaks to the philosophy Matt is touching over, which is like sometimes for certain age ranges, you know, some kids just won't really feel fully comfortable or fit in properly in a large public school environment. Because I had in sixth grade gone to Carver Middle, and
By the way, that's where Abby went, Matt.
and although it is a great school academically, it was definitely intimidating, and there were obstacles that were just, impeding my scholastic success. And that's why I think what you're saying, Matt, is relevant to me, because although I wasn't homeschooled, I was definitely placed in an environment similar to a homeschool. So I can attest to the success of the system as well.
Right.
Well, so Matt, at some point at UM where you're killing it, you decided to apply to law school. What was the motivator for you to say, hey, I want to go to law school?
Right. Well, I think one of the main things was that since I loved history so much, I really loved reading and writing. That was one thing that really, I think, was a stumbling block for a lot of students in university. They were like, oh, I've got to read 6 books for this class. That's ridiculous. Oh, I've got to write, two or three papers or something by, in this, whatever span of time they were given. I was like, great. This is I love reading all this material. I love being able to articulate ideas about this material that I've read, and when the more and more I looked into what exactly it is lawyers do, the more and more I realized, hey, if you're going to be reading a lot and if you're going to be writing a lot, this might be something that really is something I'd be good at, something I'd enjoy. And I figured if it's something I'm good at and if it's something I enjoy, I'll probably be able to help people more doing it as well. And I definitely like to think that I've been able to do that. So.
Oh, well, you certainly have. Not only do you help me help people, but you have been directly responsible, and I love this, and I'm so proud of you every time I read this. I read the case law every single day, Nori, that comes out about cruise ship cases, and almost every day the judges are citing cases that Matt and I have worked on. And when I say Matt and I, Matt's done the heavy lifting in those cases, the reading, the writing, the briefing, and all that stuff. I just argue. But Matt's been out there, and they're citing his cases. Matt has single-handedly created a lot of case law. That is the law of this country.
Right. And it's especially nice considering some of the good developments that have been made in the maritime, field recently. So,
Yeah, I can't say that all the case law is good, nor some of the case law we created together is not great. But we were out there, we tried. But some of it's spectacular, Matt, and I'm so proud of you for that.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to see your work bear fruit, and it's nice to be out there and be a part of something bigger. But it's also kind of nice that recently it seems like a lot of the work I've done seems to be bearing fruit in the maritime field.
But I got ahead of myself. You did so well at UM that you were able to get admission to one of the best law schools in the country at the University of Florida.
Right.
Once you got to the University of Florida, which is an extremely academically demanding law school, you once again rose to the very top of the University of Florida, getting a number of academic recognitions for your success there. Can you share some of those with us?
Right. Well, University of Florida was, of course, one of my top picks. I know it's one of the most well-regarded law schools in Florida. It's also, being a state school is definitely a plus, finance-wise. So, actually, interesting story. I actually applied twice. The first time I applied, I didn't actually get in, and I had some other schools, that as like secondary choices, but I decided to actually wait, until the next year, basically, to apply again. I worked with my dad actually during that time. Took the LSAT again, and actually the second time was the charm for me. When I applied the second time I got in, I was ecstatic, again, it kind of came naturally to me. Like, it was kind of surprising, but being able to enjoy, reading a lot of the volumes of cases, and other materials, and writing the various legal papers, actually was kind of a joy, to be honest. It was a joy. I mean, I'll just say it like it was. And in fact, that is one reason why I was able to get the book award for my appellate advocacy class, and I got an A+ in my legal research and writing class.
Well, let's just take a second and explain to people what that means, because that's sort of like the Academy Award for law students.
Oh yeah, right. So basically, in law school, they award you with what they call it a book award. I think because in the old days they used to actually give you a book. Now it's just now it's like a plaque, and I still have that for the book awards that I got. But the idea is, if you book a class, that means that you are the top student. They actually pick, because it's all graded on a curve, which is something that's a little daunting about law school. Is it's not like undergraduate where everybody submits their papers, everybody gets a grade, and nobody's necessarily judged based against the performance of anybody else. In law school, everybody's kind of always judged against the performance of the other students. So it's really the highest honor in any class to get the book award, because that means more than just you got an A+. That means you were the A+.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was quite
I was in a couple classes, Matt, where no one got an A. The teacher, I don't believe in A's. I don't give A's.
Right. Yeah, and that's weird also too. In law school, sometimes students, I think, can book a class with like a B+ if the professor just doesn't give A's,
Right.
or with an A-. I think I may have heard of that, one professor not giving above like an A-. Anyway, it varies from professor to professor, but definitely not what you'd experience in undergraduate most of the time, for sure. But yeah, I was able to get the book award, really, I think, just because where it was, perhaps a little more of a chore for some other students to have to plug in so much of the work that went into these classes. The massive volumes of cases you're expected to read, the massive amount of papers you're supposed to submit, and of course the strenuous final exams, which is a little different too than undergraduate and law school. A lot of times, the big bulk of your grade, aside from the various papers and other assignments you get throughout the class, the bulk of your grade ends up coming from your final exam, which you're basically expected to write fairly knowledgeable, in-depth legal analysis of the whatever topic of law that you're in your class, in whatever subtopics that the professor throws at you, some of which can sometimes have only been covered a little bit during the class, and you're expected to write just fairly in-depth analysis in like 1, 2, 3 hours, depending on how much I think most of the time it was not less than 2 hours, but yeah, usually you're expected just in a matter of hours, right? A lot of analysis, and that can be quite daunting. But again, I think just because I loved it so much, I just did my best, and the grades came out pretty good. So yeah, and of course I also ended up booking the my last class in law school. It was a Supreme Court advocacy, and that was definitely quite an enjoyable class too. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be able to use that, but actually, in a way I kind of did, although it wasn't necessarily Supreme Court specific topics, like it wasn't like the First Amendment, which is one of the major things we covered in that class.
Tell everyone how you actually have sort of been in front of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, we actually did submit one petition for certiorari in one of our cases, and that, by the way, means you petition for the Supreme Court to hear your case, because unlike when you want an appellate court, like for example, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, that's the appellate court right above the federal trial courts, or in Florida, you have the 3rd District Court of Appeal, 3rd DCA as they call it. Yeah. Basically anybody can appeal if they are willing to take the time and if they're willing to pay the filing fee. Everybody gets the right to have a panel of appellate judges review the decision of the trial court that either found against you or didn't find in one particular area the way you believe that they should have, wasn't as favorable to you as you wanted. Whatever it is, if you think that the judge in the trial case that you had did not get the law right, you have the right to have an appellate judge hear your plea that they should review the law. But of course, when it comes to Supreme Court, though, that is not actually a right. People do not have the right to have the United States Supreme Court hear an appeal from them. If you lose at the either the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, or if you're in the state court, typically that would be the Supreme Court of whatever state you're in. Sometimes I think they don't accept certiorari either in the state court, but whatever the highest court in the state that you were able to get to, then that for a lot of people is where the case ends. But basically, a petition for certiorari is you're asking the Supreme Court, not just you have to start off asking them to hear your case. You don't start off basically saying, making. You don't start off getting to actually argue on the merits. Right. You start off just arguing why this court should even entertain your case and spend the time to actually listen to more argument, essentially.
Well said, Matt. That's true. You gotta argue your way into the Supreme Court just to be able to argue your case.
Right. So we did have a little bit of experience because we had this one case where there was there's a concept in personal injury law called the open and obvious doctrine. And it comes up a lot in maritime personal injury cases. And I think one reason why is because there's a little inconsistency sometimes in how the judges apply it. Some have used it to dismiss an entire case, even where there's issues beyond just what's called like the duty to warn. And, in lawsuits, there's a lot of different theories that you can claim that somebody was negligent, somebody didn't do the right thing, and you were injured as a result. And therefore, they should be responsible for at least part of the damage, the injuries, medical bills, that you've suffered. So there's this concept called the open and obvious doctrine. And basically what it says and what it should say is essentially that if you're claiming that that somebody did not adequately warn you of a certain condition, like wet floor, for example, if that condition was, very out and obvious and anybody should have seen it if they were paying attention, then you can't really say that the premises owner had a duty to warn you about it if you should have been able to see it yourself. And I think, fair enough if you actually take it as it was originally intended, which is to apply to specifically a claim where you claim that somebody didn't warn you and as a result of that you were injured. I think the doctrine mostly makes sense. There may be some exceptions, but I think it mostly makes sense. But the problem is that I think particularly in federal court, because a lot of judges definitely want to control their docket. They definitely don't want to have cases that they believe have relatively little merit floating around. They will sometimes use this doctrine to basically dismiss a case, even if you're alleging more than just that they failed to warn you. And that's where I think the doctrine goes wrong. And that's where we decided, where unfortunately we had a case where it seemed like the judge was actually dismissing the whole case based on that doctrine and not looking at other claims about negligent maintenance. Like, even if you arguably should have seen the condition, if the condition was there in part because they didn't mop the floor frequently enough, if they didn't, apply, like, for example, anti-slippery materials to where you were stepping, which could have prevented you from slipping on a slippery surface, there's definitely an argument to be made that at that point, hey, maybe you're partially responsible for not watching where you're stepping, if that's the case, for not noticing that it's wet. But, the cruise line shouldn't escape liability, for their portion in your fall. Not, for example, applying that anti-slip strip or not cleaning up the floor adequately. So, in that case, that's where this concept called comparative negligence comes in, where there can be a percentage of fault that the jury assigns. They say, like, the premises owner, for example, is 50% responsible for your injury. You were 50% responsible. And then basically the judgment gets divided in half if that's the case, or according to any percentage that they decide. And anyways, long story short, boy, that's quite a lengthy explanation, but this is this in a way is kind of why usually it's so hard to even get your case in front of the Supreme Court, is there's so much legal background to any dispute. And basically what ended up happening is we decided that since there was so much kind of inconsistency in how not only the trial judges were applying this doctrine, but also the 11th Circuit too, a lot of ambiguous rulings from the 11th Circuit were coming out at that time. We thought, hey, we've got grounds to have the 11th Circuit actually rule what the extent of this doctrine actually is considering. Yes, the Supreme Court. Excuse me. Yes, the Supreme Court. especially considering that it seemed like the circuits were also, kind of applying it differently too.
So I would just see, Nori,
Sure.
this is why I love working with Matt so much, because it's an intellectually challenging and exciting. My favorite thing to do with Matt is really peeling the onion back on these cases and coming up with, creative ways to leverage the law. He's a lawyer's lawyer, Nori. He's not a street fighter, although he's a real tough guy. He is a tough guy, and you don't want to mess with him. But he's more of an intellectual, reflective, and analytical lawyer that can really understand the complexities of the case law that sometimes is 200-300 years old. We're dealing with old case law from hundreds and hundreds of years ago in these cruise ship cases. So that's my favorite thing to do with Matt, is so it's sort of a chess game and analyzing how to figure it out. I love that. That's my favorite part of working with him.
He definitely knows the ins and outs of
He sure
everything.
does. He sure does. Hey, Matt, just before we wrap up, anyone that's out there that's thinking about pursuing a career in the law or doing what you do in the law, what advice would you have for them?
I think pursuing what you really enjoy is a great start. Unfortunately, there's no guarantees in life, and there's no guarantee that just because you follow what you love, that everything will turn out exactly the way you had originally intended it to. Interestingly enough, I definitely did not foresee that I'd be practicing in this specific area, but I also didn't foresee how much fun I'd be having in this specific area either.
Yeah.
Nowadays, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, this whole idea that you should do what you love, it might be kind of getting outdated because of the economy and other situations. But, I say, look, at the end of the day, if you at least start by identifying what it is you love, that's actually for the first battle, I think, in life in many ways in general. Is there's a lot of people who I think go through life and they don't really ask themselves, what is it that I really enjoy? What is it that really makes me happy, that makes me want to get up in the morning? I believe it or not, actually, one important exercise in trying to do what you love is actually figuring out what you love. So that would be one of my suggestions, is figure out what you love and, try to do it. And, what's the worst that can happen? Maybe you can't do exactly what it is you might have thought at first, but what you usually will do is you'll usually be better at whatever it is you enjoy. And once you get good at something, there's almost always a way that you can make a living, or at least, there's always a way you can make a living off of it, or also, sort of pivot in some other area that also you can make a living off of too. Like there's almost always something you can do with the skill that comes with getting good at doing what you love, essentially.
That is beautiful advice, Matt. Beautiful advice, and I completely agree with it. I've been preaching that for a long time, which is why I think there's so many unhappy lawyers, is because they really just don't enjoy doing what we have to do. And I'm really lucky to be able to practice with you because we both love it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my biggest advice. And then beyond that, maybe just flexibility. Like I said, I didn't necessarily foresee that my career would be exactly this way, but I'm glad that I was flexible enough not to, and I'll just say, actually, one of the things that I was fixated on before I actually started working here is that I really wanted to work, in either like the public defender's office or the state attorney's office. Just because I found criminal law to be particularly interesting. It also raised a lot of constitutional issues, and I had, with my experience with the Supreme Court case and appellate advocacy, I thought that was kind of right in my wheelhouse. But I honestly didn't really know how a lot of these other practice areas really were. So, for whatever reason, when those particular opportunities weren't exactly working out, I'm glad that I was flexible enough to, actually it was a recommendation from a friend of mine in law school that actually told me about this job. I'm glad that I was all ears and I heard her out, and it actually sounded interesting, and I'm glad I gave it a try.
Me
and
too.
I'm glad that, yeah. So flexibility is my other.
You
Yeah, I think being flexible is my other piece of advice. Don't get trapped into thinking you can only do one particular thing, or that you are meant to only do one particular thing. Sometimes you don't really know what you're meant to do until you try something new.
Right. Great advice.
Beautiful.
Any questions, Nori?
I don't have any questions, but just to like go off of that, I have personally noticed in my time accompanying you in depositions and a number of other, situations, the amount of unhappy lawyers that exist because people will force themselves into, either doing what they think will make others happy, or doing things that they think might benefit them but aren't necessarily enjoying it. And I want to say that in my pursuit of whatever career I will have after undergrad, I'm definitely going to maintain that advice, because I don't want to, if I choose to be a lawyer, I don't want to do it if it's not something I actually find pleasure in and enjoy. Because like my father, you do 100 times better work if you actually enjoy doing it. So yeah.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you, Nori. And believe me, Nori, I do not want you to be a lawyer if it's going to make you unhappy. I only want you to be a lawyer if you find happiness in it and pleasure in it. And I hope that whatever you end up doing, you find that kind of happiness and pleasure. Matt and I have found, and he's modest about it, but I think one of the reasons it's so much fun for both of us, Matt, is that we have each other to do this with. I don't think it would be fun for me without you.
Yeah,
I can
definitely.
guarantee you it wouldn't be, because I practiced for 25 years without you. It wasn't that much fun.
Yeah, it's always nice to work with other people that enjoy the work as well. I'll
Yeah.
say that for sure.
Hey, Matt, it just reminds me one more thing before we say goodbye. This is a story. You and I came out of the elevator once at the courthouse, and the defense lawyer for the cruise line said, don't you want to settle this? I mean, do you really want to spend the next 2 weeks in trial? And I just remember looking at you going, where else would we rather be?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
want us to go back to the office and work? No, we'd rather be in trial for the next 2 weeks. That's much more fun.
yeah, we are trial lawyers after all. If we don't
We
enjoy
are.
trial, then yeah.
Hey, thanks so much, Matt, for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and your insight, both on the technical aspects of maritime law and the advice that you gave, is just priceless. So thanks so much, buddy, for spending some time with us today.
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, anytime.
All right, man. Thank you, Nori.
Thank you.